G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video on something I've mentioned literally dozens of times, but that is Magnum rifle primers. And really it's about the questions I get with that, which is largely in reference to a misunderstanding of their description. They are Magnum rifle primers, so I presume, at least from what most people say, is that if I've got a Magnum round, a 7mm rem mag, a SAUM, a short action ultra magnum, or a WSM, or a 300 Win mag, or whatever the mags, the 3-threaded Pure Magnum. If it's got Magnum in it, then I should put a Magnum primer with it. Well, no, that's not necessarily what you need to do. Magnum simply means larger, more powerful, like a Magnum champagne bottle, like a, I can't think, words fail me this second, I can't think of all the different Magnums we can talk about in that form, but Magnum simply means larger, more powerful. In the situation of a primer, it's a more powerful primer, that's all it is. So what that means is it's going to, if you have any issues igniting your powder or getting it to ignite fast enough, then you need a more powerful primer. Simple as that. So that can mean in a normal cartridge with powder that doesn't want to ignite. So you can be with a 300, not a 300, with a 308 Winchester or a 243, and you're in really freezing conditions and your powder doesn't want to ignite. That can be down there. You can be in the opposite scenario. I very rarely use Magnum primers because I very rarely need them. I'll use up to my 375 Gibbs, which is a 375 Shytech improved, and I'll still use just a large rifle primer. And that's the same as for the 3378 Weatherby Magnum, for the 3-threaded Pure, for the 33XE, for the all the way back down. I don't use Magnum primers. There is a couple of cartridges I do use the Magnum primers in, but that's when I find that I either get a softer, or the burn is basically not as thorough. Well, what I should say is what I'm really talking about there is when I get the occasional misfire or the occasional hang fire. Something's going on. Now there's other things generally going on, cartridge design, case fill, all sorts of bits and pieces, but I live in a pretty mild to hot climate, so I don't suffer from really freezing conditions. You know, my really freezing is 0 degrees. When you're living in the extremer parts of our world and you have -20s and -30s and -40s and that sort of stuff, really cold for a long time, that might be a different thing. I also use ADI powders in the range where fairly compressed loads and things that are pretty easy to ignite. So it means what I'm really saying is, yes, there can be a little bit of testing here. You can fall back to bigger round, bigger primer, it'll definitely go bang. So I suppose there's some ease to that. I went away from Magnum primers very early on because of the testing that I did. A bit of logic, a bit of I'm a mechanic, I'm a performance car engineer, I don't have any degrees, but I do a lot of work in that world, and the softer start to an ignition cycle gives me a smoother power stroke, and that really matters in my head in the logic of firing a firearm. And I felt that I could feel a difference with a Magnum primer in, and this was a long time ago. I think it was in my 300 Win mag when I had Magnum primers in there and I fired it and it just felt sharper. It was up high to the not compressed, but up into the top end of its pressure, but it felt a little sharper with the Magnum primers in them than when I reset the load and did it and got to the same sort of pressure points with a normal large rifle primer. It felt a little nicer in a almost indiscernible sense, but it felt a little nicer on the trigger brake when that round went off. And I saw better groups. Now, groups are one thing, the day could be the wind, all those bits and pieces I'm shooting, I would think those in that, from what I remember, that was 2,000 yards. So there's all sorts of other things that could put into it. But what I really found was, to me, it felt better, and then I started to transfer that over to everything, and then everything went with the large rifle primer. And everything seemed to improve a little bit. Now that is at best anecdotal, at best my feelings, and I don't have any proper data to go with that, but that's where I went and that's where I've always sat. And like I said, if you put that with the performance motor mechanic hat on, then that smoother ignition cycle makes sense to me as well. As I said, there's a couple of places where I've run into problems. I tried to put just the Magnum rifle primer in a 50 BMG. I tried to do a case that way. I haven't made that work properly. I couldn't get that to burn properly. Some other details inside there. So it isn't necessarily one size fits all, always do it, but it comes right back to what a Magnum primer is about. Is it is a more powerful primer. It is not meaning it goes with a Magnum round. You can't put it in a 22 Magnum. So it's not about, it's just larger, use it where you need to, and test. You know, there is nothing engineeringly wrong. I suppose the last bit I would say to go with that is I've never proved the testing properly once again, but people tend to talk about around the 2 grains of powder is the extra energy that a Magnum primer will give. I'm sure if you do some Googling, do some research, there's going to be more or less, or people have actually tested that side of things. But my logic was not about the power side of things. I can get there with the powder I'm trying to run versus the pressure I'm trying to run. I was going with the trying to make it smooth, trying to get the rifle to cycle as smoothly, a smoother ignition as I could get, so make that bang as soft as I can make it, I suppose is what I was up to. But the reason to use the Magnum primers is you've got freezing conditions, you're out, you hunt, you're in the snow, that sort of stuff. You want to be able to drop around into the snow or into the ice and pull it back out and dry it off and make it go bang, even when you've got that round down to -2 degrees or -10 degrees and you want to go bang, then yes, I probably would be using a Magnum primer in that situation as well. And I'd probably be using it in a 6.5 Creedmoor or 243 or that sort of stuff as well if I was in the extreme cold side of things. But listen, that's not my field. I don't know. I don't hunt in those conditions, so I don't know. Probably there's going to be people that'll list below to read the comments and see what people have got to say. But big deal is Magnum doesn't go with Magnum. Magnum is just bigger, and it, as always, comes down to your combination and what works best for you. Anyway guys, that's a not too quick one, but a little bit of a quick one on Magnum primers and whether you should or you shouldn't use them.